I am here with the Democratic chairman of the January 6th committee, Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for being here today. In the first hearing of the January 6th committee, you had this to say as a part of your opening statement. I'm going to read it. You said, "I am from a part of the country where people justified the actions of slavery, the Ku Klux Klan and lynching. I am reminded of that dark history as I hear voices today try and justify the actions on January 6, 2021. After 18 long months of hearings, of public scrutiny, has this taken a personal toll on you?
It's been difficult. I've spent many nights away from home. I've spent a lot of time just trying to figure out why in the greatest democracy in the world would people want to all of a sudden storm the Capitol because they lost an election. You know, normally in a democracy, you settle your differences at the ballot box. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but under no circumstances do you tear the city hall up or the courthouse up, and God forbid, the United States Capitol.
It seems to me that there's just a lot of what ifs because President Trump's attempted coup, right, was not successful in large part because elected officials, many of them Republicans, wouldn't go along with his plan. But I keep thinking about what if Mike Pence would not have rebuffed then President Trump's request, right? What if Brad Raffensperger would have said, okay, I'm going to find you these 11,000 votes in Georgia? Do you think about the what ifs?
Oh, absolutely. And the thing that my tenure as chair of this committee has brought to me is I'm firmly convinced that in America, there's still good people who believe in this country. Sometimes they are confused, but a majority of them believe in democracy. And so what we saw in Brad Raffensperger, what we saw in others who came forward, is that patriotism really was beyond party.
Let's talk about the conclusions that the committee has come to. Are there conclusions that you all have reached that are new since the last public hearings?
Well, there are some findings that we found, to be very honest with you, that January 6th, had it not been for the encouragement of Donald Trump, would have never occurred. It would have been the normal transfer of power that we do every 4 years when there's a presidential election. But as we started looking at the work, a pattern developed of individuals, not individuals per se who were working in government. These were outsiders being manipulated by former President Trump and encouraged to do what they were doing.
I think it's fair to say under your leadership, the January 6th committee has really demonstrated how a serious inquiry in Congress happens in the modern era. Can you just talk to us a little bit about how and maybe what were some of the points of disagreement or contention among folks in the committee? All of the decisions you ultimately came to were unanimous decisions, but I have to imagine there was some
Well, no, that was a lot of back and forth. And actually until January 19th, December 19th, we were still back and forth because we wanted to get it right. And so there were some decisions we made not to go forth because we didn't have the unity of effort that we wanted to show this country. America needed. Which
one of those decisions was it?
Well,
because I do think there's still some unanswered questions.
Something, for instance, there were some lawyers who gave bad advice to people who gave depositions to our committee. That is clearly an ethical violation on behalf of those lawyers. We can prove it, but we said, well, look, we'll let the Bar Association handle that on their own. There were lawyers also paid by individuals to represent clients who came before our committee who basically had a vested interest and those clients are not telling the truth. So there were significant dollars raised by former President Trump that never went toward the efforts for which people donated money. And so we don't know if this was an effort to just make money, but we know that when people donate money to you, ostensibly to stop the steal, and none of that money can be traced to anything, quote, to stop the steal, then, and you still have the money right now, 2 years after, there's some problems with that.
But there were not unanimous decisions reached on what to do there.
That's right. Okay. So rather than go down that, we looked at the broader issue. And to be honest with you, we wanted to look at recommendations and that, but it was just so egregious that the committee felt in terms of what the former president had orchestrated, that we just couldn't in good conscience not make the referral.
Do you have confidence in the Justice Department's investigation into the former president?
I am more comfortable with the fact that the special counsel has been actively engaged in pursuing any and all information available. They have been in contact with our committee, asking us to provide various transcripts and what have you.
Yes, they sent NBC News recently learned that they sent a letter from Special Counsel Jack Smith. Now, committee members who have done interviews have said that they themselves have not been in contact with Justice Department officials, but they didn't know if you had. So what's the nature of your cooperation, if you will? With
they wrote me as chair, and we made the decision in consultation with other members that we will cooperate. But early on, an effort was made, but we were in the midst of our work, and we felt we had to get the report done. We had to get it filed, which we'll file on Thursday morning, so the whole public will have access to it. But it was a willingness on our part to get the job done. There were people that we deposed that justice had not deposed. There were electors in various states that justice couldn't find. We found them.
You found them.
We found them. We deposed them. And so we had a lot of information, but now we make all that information available to them. And if they come back and want to interview staff or any of the members as to any additional information that we know, we'd be more than happy to do it.
Other referrals, not related to the Justice Department, but you made referrals of 4 members of Congress, the committee did, to the Ethics Committee. Separately, though, I did not, I have not seen, and maybe there's some, you can illuminate some of this for us, recommendations about the members of Congress that we know aided and abetted in some way, shape, or form the insurrection or the plot to disrupt the peaceful transition of power. On the Ethics Committee referrals, have you reached out to the Ethics Committee about what their process is going to be, what happens come January, Republicans are in charge? And then for these other members of Congress, should they too not be held accountable? After the Civil War, members of the United States Senate who sided with the Confederacy, they were expelled by their colleagues.
Well, yeah, and obviously that was called the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, where individuals came forth and passed that law so that you couldn't be intimidated if you came and participated with this great government of ours. So I think people should not be intimidated. I think we absolutely have a right as Americans to participate and not be intimidated. And so, to be honest with you, Simone, what occurred on January 6th and what our committee ultimately uncovered, well, there were individuals who really wanted to alter the outcome of the will of the people. And they were prepared in texting the chief of staff of the president and other people about doing all these kind of things. Never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined that a member of Congress representing over 700,000 people, would participate in the active denial of the lawful right of voters in this country. So now, that being said, the law is kind of silent on what you can do with members who participate in that. I subpoenaed those 4 members. They refused to acknowledge the subpoena. And so the committee said, look, law is kind of silent. We'll give it to the Ethics Committee because there's an oath they take. So we hope the Ethics Committee will look at it seriously. As you know, it's an equal number of Democrats, Republicans on it. So we'll just have to see what happens.